This right here is a classic looking whiskey bottle, but is the whiskey inside it also a classic? This week, let's find out, because we're looking at the Nikka Pure Malt Red Edition. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Matt, I'm the Whiskey Nerd, and like I said, this week I'm looking at the Nikka Pure Malt Red Edition. So let me get it into the glass, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it. Also, first off, let's just acknowledge that cork pop once more. Yeah, like this is an interesting looking cork because it is a real cork, but it's covered in plastic. So it actually gives a really like crisp seal to the bottle, and it does come up with a big cork pop. I don't think I've ever seen a bottle with a cork like that, where there's a cork with that plastic seal. Just interesting, just something to note about this whiskey. This is actually one of the whiskeys I recently bought on a trip to Japan. If you want to see a video where I show off all the whiskeys that I bought when I was over in Japan, I'll put a link up there and a link down below, where I'm asking people to say what whiskeys they want me to review first, and people said to review this one here, the Nikka Pure Malt Red, and the other one, the Nikka Pure Malt Black. So today I'm reviewing this one here, and then maybe next week, maybe the week after, I'll get to that Nikka Pure Malt Black, but today it's all about this one right here. This whiskey I think is currently a distillery exclusive, like it says it on the box, distillery limited, so I think it's not widely available outside of Japan right now, because recently enough they changed the rules of Japanese whiskey making, and so for something to qualify as 100% Japanese whiskey, it has to be brewed, aged, distilled, everything about it has to be done in the island of Japan. And Nikka are pretty like forthcoming about it. If you look on their website, they have got whiskeys that say this is qualifying as Japanese whiskey and this here isn't, because a lot of time with Japanese distilleries they'll often blend in Scotch whiskey to kind of bulk it up a little bit or round out the flavour profile, and Nikka does own the Ben Nevis distillery over in Scotland, so they actually use that Ben Nevis whiskey in things like their super pure malt, in the session whiskeys like that are now kind of marketed almost like as an international whiskey rather than being a Japanese whiskey. This whiskey doesn't appear on their website. Like I said, it's right now, it's just a distillery exclusive. It might come back on the market again. I think in previous times they had a white label version of it as well, but I think it's still got a bit of that Scotch whiskey in it. Like I did ask them at the distillery, like, what does a pure malt mean? Like, what do they mean when they say pure malt? And they said that, oh well, it's using just our whiskey, but they were a little cagey about it. It was kind of like, oh, it's not a single malt, because they do have two distilleries. They've got the Yoichi Distillery up north, and they've got the Miyagikyo Distillery down south. So they do have those two different distilleries, and so you can't call it a single malt if it's from two different distilleries, because it's not from one single distillery. But they do have what's called the Taketsuru pure malt, and they're very clear about saying that pure malt whiskey is 100% Japanese and does qualify as Japanese whiskey. So that one is made of just those two distilleries, whereas this one here might include some of the Scotch whiskey from that Ben Nevis distillery. And Nikka does have a pretty good connection to Scotland. I mean, the founder of Nikka, a guy called Masataka Taketsuru, he originally studied how to distill and learned how to distill in Scotland. He took his craft back to Japan. He actually married a Scottish woman called Rita. Like, there's a lot of connections there with that Scotland, so I think their whiskey style does connect pretty well with the Scottish whiskey styles. But this one here might not be 100% Japanese whiskey, but it's gonna be a lot of Japanese whiskey. Now, what is in here? Because they do have those two distilleries. So the Yoichi Distillery up north, that one makes really heavily peated whiskey. Now, they can make lightly peated or non-peated whiskey if they want, but I think typically they make like heavily peated, at least heavily peated by Japanese standards, heavily peated down to like medium-peated whiskey at the northern distillery. At the Miyagikyo Distillery down south, they make maybe like medium-peated whiskey down to like no-peated or non-peated whiskey. They also make grain whiskey there. And this whiskey here, they don't say what it is, but you can kind of figure out by tasting it. It's probably more of that Miyagikyo Distillery, where it's lightly peated, and a little bit of that heavily peated whiskey, whereas the black one is the other way around, whereas more of that heavily peated whiskey and less of the lighter fruitier whiskey. So this one here will be a lighter fruitier malt. And they do kind of acknowledge that on the side of the bottle, on the side of the box here, it says that it's a pure malt whiskey, honouring the essence of the flamboyant malt at the Miyagikyo Distillery. Its distinctive features are the light, sweet vanilla with fruity notes and soft, gentle flavour. So it is kind of meant to be a lighter, softer whiskey. And I think that's kind of all there is to say, but I mean, the bottle itself is very simple. It's kind of meant to look like those classic original style whiskey bottles when they didn't have all those big old designs. It just says pure malt red, product of Nikka, and then in Japanese it says whiskey, ingredients, malt, size of the bottle, 500 ml, alcohol content is 43% ABV. Like a lot of Nikka whiskies come in at that 43% alcohol by volume. They don't say if it's non-chill filtered or if it's got colour added. I would assume it's maybe got a little bit of colour added just for consistency's sake, because it's quite a clear bottle, but they don't say it. If there wasn't colour added, they would probably say that there's no colour added. So typically when whiskey distilleries don't say that it's non-chill filtered, when they don't say that it doesn't have any colour added, that's a pretty good indication that it does have colour added to it. But I think, like I said, that's all there is. Let's go in for the nose on this one. Cheers. Yeah, now they said flamboyant. I'm not sure I'd say it's a flamboyant whiskey, but it is really malty, sweet, a lot of vanilla, fruit, and a little bit of peat coming through as well. Like there is a little element of peated whiskey coming through, but it is mostly on that lighter, sweeter side. There is a lot of vanilla going on in this. We're here. We've got those like malted kind of notes, like the malted biscuits, malted cakes, the cooked grains, like that almost biscuity note, but with a lot of vanilla coming through, a bit of caramel. I wouldn't say a lot of oak spice, but maybe like a little bit of baking spice, like cinnamon, kind of nutmeg, clove, that kind of area. Not like really oaky, earthy spice, but that little bit of like baking, kind of sweet, sugary spiciness coming through. Maybe a little bit of apples as well in terms of fruitiness. Like maybe apples, maybe like almost a little bit like watermelon, not watermelon, you know, the white melon or the yellow melon, that where it's not super sweet, or it's that lighter apple, pear, light white melon, that kind of flavor coming through. And there's also like a bit of citrus peel coming through. Like there is that kind of like maybe more than an orange, like almost heading towards like a lemon, like a grapefruit, like that, where it's slightly more sour than an orange, but not quite into like lemon territory yet. Like it's still with that sweetness, with that kind of lightness coming through. So I think that's enough on the nose. Like it is quite nice, but it is on the lighter side. So let's go in for the palate and see if it changes. Cheers. That is sweet up front. Like it has this really nice biscuity caramel, like really that kind of note comes through up front. Then you get a bit of tingly spice. You get that like almost peppercorns, like that kind of tingly spice. And then you get a bit of peat coming through as well. Like there is actually a fair, once you swallow it, once it spreads out, you get a bit of that peat hit coming through. Is there a little bit on the nose? It's more evident in the palate. You get that peat flavor coming through. And I was also getting a bit more of that kind of like the lemony, grapefruity, citrusy note that I mentioned on the nose is coming through here as well. Again, with that kind of tingle, that kind of acidic, salivating kind of flavor, where you get that. Like, I didn't really get a huge amount of vanilla. I'd say I got that sweetness, I got the biscuity notes, I got the like the caramel notes, but on the first sip round, didn't get a huge amount of that vanilla. So gonna go in again for another sip and see how it is. Cheers. Second sip round, more of that malt actually, and less of the peat. Like the first hit of that peat hitting my palate was definitely there. Now that it's in my tongue, it's in my taste buds, the peat, it's almost kind of, not, I wouldn't say it's fading off, but it's there as a baseline flavor, giving me more of that malt, a little bit of like stewed apple with the sweetness, and the like those baking spices coming through as well. Again, that lemon, that grapefruit, but less of that like vanilla flavor, less of that like that. Yeah, I'd say the sweetness is more into like the fruit side of sweetness, with the apples, with a little bit of lemon, the citrus, that sort of stuff, as opposed to that really rich caramel vanilla. There's still that flavor there. You will get that with a malt whiskey, but it's not like super sweet, super caramelly. It's more that fruity flavor coming through. So I'm going to go in again for a final sip, and this time I'm going to focus on the finish. Cheers. Okay, up front, you get that sweet malt, you get that bit of peat, you get the fruity citrus, and on the finish, I wouldn't say there's a really long finish. Like as I'm talking, as I'm breathing, I'm getting a bit of that peat coming through again. Like that peat is there, as the other, like I said, it's there, it gets into your palate, it gets into your taste buds, then the other notes are there, but they fade relatively quickly. Like I've still got a little bit of that tingly spice on my tongue, like peppercorn, almost kind of spice there, but as I'm talking, as I'm breathing, the finish is gone relatively quickly. I'd say it's short to medium with that, like the peppery bit, the bit of the peat lasting longer than those fruity notes going through. And there's nothing really kind of new coming through on the finish. Like sometimes with a whiskey, you'll get something new. This time it's just kind of like everything fading off at different speeds, but everything kind of fading off. Before I give my final thoughts on this whiskey, if you're new here, scroll down, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. I put out whiskey reviews like this whiskey review every Wednesday, and I put out cocktail recipes featuring whiskey every Friday, and I will have a cocktail recipe featuring this whiskey this Friday, so if you want to see that, make sure you hit subscribe and make sure you check back. But as for this whiskey, I think I like it. Now, I will say, I did a bit of research online. This here bottle, it's only 500ml as well. It does sell, I think I've seen it in some stores here in Ireland and internationally, for about like 60, 65, 70 euro. I don't know if it's worth that. When I got it at the distillery, I paid, I think like with the conversion rate, it was probably like 28, 29 euro, like less than 30 euro. I remember thinking, that's pretty good value because I was able to get both bottles for cheaper than I was able to get one of these bottles outside of Japan. So I think at that price, it's fair. At that kind of distillery price, maybe if it's given a wider release, it will have a cheaper price. But I think now, because it's hard to find, people are jumping that price up. I wouldn't say I'd pay 60 euro for this, but less than 30 euro. Yeah, it's a very nice little whiskey. Quite fruity, quite sweet, reminiscent of a Scotch whiskey, like the Nikka whiskies are in that kind of Scotch territory, but not overly peaty, not overly Scotchy, just nice and fruity and kind of with that core Japanese character of a bit of smoke, a bit of sweetness, and generally quite light. So I think that's all there is to say about this whiskey. Like I said, it's nice, it's light, I'm definitely going to keep on enjoying it, and I will see you next time. Sláinte.